members of the faculty, and my dear friends. Welcome to day 3 of Conventus 2024, the annual management conclave of International Management Institute, New Delhi. Conventus, with its roots in Latin, translates to coming together. Through Conventus 24, we invite you to embark upon India's path to a $7 trillion economy and how instrumental its role will be in leading the crucial revolution in the times to come. My fellow compare Anushka and I, Gurleen, shall take you through the economic summit of Conventus 24. This year, Conventus is structured around the theme India's $7 trillion ambition. How will India lead the next global economic wave?
Let's paint a picture. A whopping 65% of India's population is under 35. A demographic dividend brewing with energy, ambition, and prosperity. Compare this scenario to a startup, where the country's youth can be the venture capital, investing to harness their energy for maximum output. In the early phases of the startup, growth is more than returns, but yes, the metric holds utmost importance.
This leads us to a very important frame of discussion. Achieving growth driven by people and building an economy where people reign supreme. Hence, in its path to translate to a $7 trillion mark, India's economic future depends on empowering its citizens, not just tracking numbers on a chart. India's growth aspect must be sustainable and inclusive, balancing economic progress with environmental protection and social equity. This holistic approach will build a resilient economy capable of weathering unforeseen challenges.
Before we proceed further, we would like to play the Conventus 2024 theme video.
A nation like no other, with people of unlimited potential, is on the brink of unprecedented glory. The story of India is one of ups and downs, of navigating challenges and managing conflicts, of finding harmony amidst chaos. Now, the stage is set. India has dared to dream, a dream of becoming a $7 trillion economy.
The unstoppable force behind this long journey has been the people of the country. The next chapter in India's history will be marked by
GDP, growth driven by people. The people are the engines of our economy. The key to success for businesses is to convert their potential into purpose. When human resources are empowered and engaged, real value is unlocked and dreams are turned into reality.
It's time to explore the best practices of the businesses that have made a mark by being of the people, for the people, by the people. So, let us be all ears for their stories and ideas and learn from their rich experiences.
As we begin the session, we would like to give a brief introduction of our distinguished panelists. We would request Dr. Professor Rajiv Anantaram to kindly felicitate the guests.
We are honored to have Dr. Charan Singh with us. Sir is the Chief Executive at EGROW Foundation. He is the non-executive chairman of Punjab and Sindh Bank.
To have Mr. Anup Wadhwan. Sir is a public policy expert with over 40 years of experience in governance, economic development, and international institutions. As the former Commerce Secretary to the Government of India, he led initiatives in foreign trade policy and WTO engagement. His expertise spans banking, insurance, capital markets, and provincial policy, including urban and rural development, as Secretary in Uttarakhand. He has held leadership roles at the World Bank and African Development Bank, focusing on public utilities and grassroots service delivery. An educator at Duke and Penn State, Mr. Wadhwan now serves as an independent director for Bajaj Alliance and Cred Avenue and advises organizations on finance, governance, and sustainable development. We are honored to have you here with us, sir.
We are honored to have Ms. Mitali Nikor as our esteemed speaker. Ms. Nikor is an experienced economist and public policy specialist with expertise in gender mainstreaming across infrastructure and policy, advising organizations like the Asian Development Bank, the World Bank, and private firms such as PwC and EY. Founder of the Nikor Associates with sector experience in urban mobility and MSME development. Ms. Nikor holds a master's degree in economics from the London School of Economics with research focused on female labor force participation, gender diversity, equity, inclusion, and gender budgeting. Thank you, ma'am, for your gracious presence.
We are pleased to introduce Dr. Sambit Basu. Sir is currently serving as Director and Chief Energy Economist at the Power Foundation of India. In addition, he is a visiting professor at NSB NTPC School of Business, sharing his expertise in energy economics. Previously, he held senior roles at Fitchner Consulting Engineers and IDFC First Bank, influencing key economic strategies. His experience spans work with the Asian Development Bank and top firms like PwC and Rio Tinto, making him a vital force in shaping India's sustainable energy landscape. We are truly delighted and humbled to have you join us today.
We are honored to welcome Mr. Tabrez Ahmed. Sir is currently serving as the Group Director of Government Affairs and Public Policy for Dell Technologies in the Asia Pacific and Japan region. He leads efforts in digital transformation, cybersecurity and innovation across India, Japan and Southeast Asia. Previously, he has held key roles in AB InBev, Flipkart and eBay, where he shaped policy for e-commerce and intellectual property. His earlier tenure as Secretary General of the Organization of Pharmaceutical Producers of India and Director of Intellectual Property at Microsoft emphasizes commitment to IP, compliance and sustainable development, impacting governance and technology across the region. Thank you, sir, for your gracious presence.
Finally, we are honored to welcome our moderator for the session, Dr. Professor Rajiv Anantaram. I would request the Secretary of the Economics Club, Mr. Ayush Singh, to felicitate our moderator. Sir is a senior faculty of economics at International Management Institute, New Delhi. He has previously served as senior associate and head in Standard and Poor's Research Group, senior fellow at ICRIER, and senior associate editor at Business Standard. He was also an Emerging Leaders Fellow at the Australia-India Institute, University of Melbourne. Sir holds a Master's in Physics from IIT Mumbai, an MPA from Syracuse University, and a PhD in Public Policy and Applied Economics from the University of Pittsburgh. His research focuses on international trade, capital flows, and innovation-led growth through science and technology policies. We are honored to have you here, sir. As we move to fulfill our ambition of reaching the $7 trillion economy mark by 2030, it has become imperative for the nation to take a deeper look into all the economic variables that play a role in achieving this. This year, we put a major emphasis on a sector that contributes 17% to the GDP, employing millions and showing a staggering growth potential, the manufacturing sector.
Scaling up manufacturing enhances the economic infrastructure and drives investment in advanced technologies such as automation and AI, fostering innovation and competitiveness. Furthermore, manufacturing growth in sectors like electronics, automotive, and renewable energy will enable India to harness global market opportunities, creating high-value jobs and contributing to sustainable urban and rural development, leading to a more profound witnessing of an economy driven and fostered by people.
A major fillip to the sector can be accrued to several government initiatives to move away from the era of servicification of manufacturing to making the sector a dominant force of its own. The prominent ones include Make in India, launch of various PLI schemes, and enhanced focus on Swadeshi, and many more in the pipeline.
Taking this all into consideration, we present the theme of the summit, the boom of manufacturing in India, a deeper look into various economic aggregates. We would now like to play the video for the Economic Summit.
When I first visited the US as a Prime Minister, India was the 10th largest economy in the world. Today, India is the 6th largest economy.
India remains the fastest growing major economy in the world.
मेक इन इंडिया कंसेप्ट को जिसकी जिसकी जिम्मेवारी है उसको हम पूरा करें, हम आगे बढ़े, मैन्युफैक्चरिंग सेक्टर में हम फिर एक बार नई ऊंचाइयों को पार करें।
India is a middle power on its way, according to some specialists, to become a great power, a superpower.
We would like to request Professor Rajiv Anantram to take the session forward and start with the panel discussion.
Good morning. Before I actually begin my introductory comments, I would like to thank the panel for being here. They've been a very consistent supporter of IMI's programs, be it Conventus, the post-budget discussion or the pre-budget discussion, whatever it is. And I do hope that they will continue to support IMI in the future. I'd also like to welcome this wonderful audience here. And I'm sure they will have some very interesting questions for the panelists at the conclusion of the specific questions we plan to discuss. The sub-theme of today's discussion, which is manufacturing, okay, is on everybody's mind. Okay? It's been on everybody's mind for almost 5 decades, ever since the first literature on the fallacy of premature deindustrialization started creeping up. Now, there have been several kind of timid moves to kind of revitalize manufacturing. Some of them were, it was like more like a 1 step forward and a 2 step back kind of thing. Even the reforms of 1991, which were radical, okay, didn't specifically address issues that manufacturing could address in a granular, detailed sense. Sure, trade liberalization, internal liberalization, etc., did lead to advantages which manufacturing could avail of, but the specific measures, okay, that were needed to revitalize manufacturing, do a policy U-turn, okay, were kind of lacking. Today's discussion, in the interest of time, I'm going to keep it very simple and broadly disaggregated into 3 sections. Each of the panelists will have an opportunity to make a small, a small meaning a rather brief comment on the question, and then we can come back if there are any additional points they wish to make. And I'm sure some of the questions that anything they might have left unsaid, will be probably answered through questions that students might have. The first question is, what ails India's manufacturing? Let's identify the problems as to why India's manufacturing is kind of spinning its wheels. The second is, what has been, this is kind of an impact analysis. An impact analysis of what, okay, the formal government policy measures, okay, to revitalize manufacturing. First, the national manufacturing policy, which was tabled in Parliament in 2011. Then there was the Make in India speech, the famous Make in India speech that the Prime Minister never tires talking about, made on Independence Day 2014, which, in my humble opinion, is largely a rewrite of the national manufacturing policy. Within that, within the last 10 years, we've seen policies such as the PLI, export-led initiatives, et cetera, okay? But still, manufacturing remains 15% of GDP, and it's not as if the GDP has quadrupled or something like that. So that's two. And then, obviously, the logical progression of this line of thought is how, okay, how can we reimagine, okay, the new manufacturing policy, the Make in India, and all such initiatives, okay? It obviously might need a course correction. The plan as envisioned was very well intentioned, but nonetheless, it might be in need of course correction. Our experts are here to tell us that, okay? So without further ado, I will ask my first question, okay, to the panel, and then we can go in any order. I think we could start with Professor Charan Singh and come this way. My first question is, if you could provide a description of the landscape of Indian manufacturing, more importantly, what ails it? I mean, please feel free to tell us what you find are its strengths, but if you could only tell us, I mean, if we could start with what ails Indian manufacturing, what are the fundamentals that are kind of lacking, then we could take a start from there. Professor Charan Singh.
Thank you very much. It's a brilliant question and very, very pertinent question. After all, 10 years have passed by, the Prime Minister has spoken about Make in India, and it's not happening. So it's a very obvious question that where have we faltered? So I'll like to answer in the following various points. Firstly, you know that the whole world, not only India, the whole world has passed through a very difficult phase for the last 5 years. Unbelievable, once in a century situation. So if you're passing through such a difficult phase, obviously none of the economic activities, especially manufacturing, which involves lots of investment, is going to take place. So that is the first thing, one has to recognize that. The second is that in the last 3 years, especially after the Russia-Ukraine war, there was total disruption in the supply chain, and there was commodity issues that came up in a very big way. Inflation in most advanced countries shot through the sky. If you take a 30-year average of inflation in US, UK, Euro, it's been generally less than 2%. And if you look at the inflation pressure since January 22, when the war started, inflation was in the range of 10%. So imagine in our country, inflation is 6% average, 30 years. If it rises to 30%, what will be our plight? So if this is how the inflation behaved, the Fed Reserve, the Bank of England, and the ECB, they raised their interest rates also sky high. When the interest rates are so high, and everybody knows this is because of a disruption, and return the rates of interest will come down sooner or later, investment in manufacturing will not take place, neither in India nor globally. So that is the other factor which one has to see, that why, despite the Prime Minister talking about Make in India and emphasizing on manufacturing, could not take place. The interest rates are very high. They're still very high. While America has started downscaling its interest rates, India has yet not started. The third, why did India lose in its manufacturing trajectory? If the growth story says first agriculture, then industry, then services, why did India jump from agriculture straight to services? That's another very pertinent question. And that is because China, our neighbor, has been doing all sort of things which it should not have done. It does dumping, it manipulates its exchange rate, and therefore makes things available at such cheap rate that not only in India, its immediate neighbor with porous borders, but even in most advanced countries, the industrial sector and manufacturing suffered very badly. The last point I would like to make in this is, in any emerging country and with the young demographic India that we have, and in your Conventus you have mentioned it repeatedly that we are a very young country with the median age of around 29, which is very, very less. Demographic dividend has to be reaped, and for next 20 years it will be there. How are we going to reap it? MSMEs is the only solution. I'm so happy we have amongst us Madam sitting here, who I think is an expert on MSMEs. She'll give us some guidance on it. But my own feeling is that MSMEs have not got any special package except a change in the definition, slight change in the definition and the limits. The maximum attrition rate is in MSMEs. MSMEs are the most vulnerable. They don't have deep pockets, and they are the ones who need support all the time. And NBFCs do give them some money, but NBFCs give them money at a very high rate of interest. So subvention has to be done. Was subvention taking place? Now that brings me to a very large question, and with that I'll conclude. What is the scope that the government can support MSMEs? So let me give you one illustration. In India, tax to GDP ratio is about 17%. Which is the lowest amongst all the countries in the world. In America, which we aspire to be, it's around 40%. In Scandinavian countries, which are so beautiful, their per capita income is much higher than even America, it's around 45%. In India, it's 17%. This is all we want to contribute to the national kitty. What can the government do? How much can they distribute the cake when the cake is so small? So I think the fault lies at various places, and we as individuals and citizens can't escape that. Thank you.
Well, good morning to everyone. I'm delighted to be here. So let me start with a quick, background. When the 1991 reforms happened in our country, there was tremendous promise and hope that things would change on a secular basis. And I remember in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was this feeling that 8% plus growth is there for the taking, and we are now on the China pattern into self-sustained secular growth for some time to come. But that hope unfortunately was belied. And of course, after those initial reforms, various other steps have been taken: the national manufacturing policy, Make in India, then PLIs. Unfortunately, the manufacturing sector remains stunted. It's 15% of the economy today, and in fact, post-COVID, the formal sector has shrunk. The formal sector has shrunk in absolute terms. In terms of labor force, the rural labor force has gone up by 3 to 4 million. Those temporary migrant workers didn't go back to their jobs after their experience in COVID. And we've ended up in a situation where we are actually a step or two behind where we started. And of course, our manufacturing sector remains very rudimentary. Our high-tech manufacturing is highly dependent on imports. We are now exporting huge amounts of electronic products, including Apple phones, but then the value addition is about 6 to 7% or maybe 10% at best. All the components are still coming from abroad. Pharma sector, we take great pride, and we have reason to in some ways, but then all the APIs are coming from abroad. So you name the sectors, whether it is making aircraft, we are making aircraft, but then the engines are imported. So the manufacturing sector is not only small, it is rudimentary in its sophistication. And of course, after so many years of reform, so many years of effort, our per capita income remains pitiably low at about $2,500. China is now at about $12,000 per capita, almost 5 to 6 times our level. And our distribution makes it worse. I was reading somewhere that, to be in the top 10% in the country, your monthly income needs to be around a lakh or so, or maybe even less. So that is a kind of distribution problems at a low per capita income. Distribution issues at a per capita income, like in the West, US is also unequal like anything, but then they are unequal at an average of $60,000 to $70,000. And we have a major crisis of jobs and investment. For the first time in their history, the IITs, the four main IITs, I'm not talking about IIT Ropar and all the, mushrooming campuses we've set up, but the four main IITs could not place 46% of their students. So it's a major crisis. Investment, our gross fixed domestic capital formation has been falling. The private component has been falling more, and the overall total has been propped up by government investment, where the capital nature of that expenditure by government is in question. So, and all this is, inconsistent with the kind of growth numbers we are projecting, that we are growing at 8%, and 8% is now there for the taking, but 8% and there is no investment, there are no jobs. It's somehow the story doesn't fit very well. And people have now, raised questions about the accuracy of our GDP growth data. There are issues with the new series that was introduced about, I think, 10 years back. There was an initial jump, which is understandable. You change the base, but then the growth subsequently has been somewhat exaggerated. There's a huge discrepancy in the calculations by the production method and the expenditure method. There's an error term which is very huge. And people like Mr. Arvind Subramaniam and Ashoka Modi are questioning that we are using a deflator of 1.5% to get the real GDP, whereas inflation is in the 4 to 5% range. So you're not deflating the nominal numbers adequately. So, and going with the other not anecdotal, but the other facts on jobs, investment, there is reason perhaps to be concerned about what our growth actually is. And then, we are sidetracking the issue by now saying we are the third largest, fifth largest economy, we'll be the third largest economy, we are going for 7 trillion. So let us say you crossed UK. UK 70 million people, we are 1600 million people at the same aggregate GDP, which means when your GDP becomes 23 times the British GDP, your per capita income is where the British per capita income is today. So this aggregate number, 3 trillion, 5 trillion, 7 trillion is meaningless. The thing is, what is the level of welfare it affords? And that is calculated not perfectly, but to some extent by the per capita income. So we have to talk in per capita income terms and the distribution of that income, rather than sidetracking the issue and celebrating 3 trillion and 5 trillion and 7 trillion, and 5 and 7 have not come. And they will come almost necessarily through inflation, even if not through real growth. They'll take much longer. Of course, having said all this, we are a very, very ingenious people. We are the most capable people in the world in many ways, in spite of the constraints our system, creates for investors. We have a certain threshold below which we won't fall. There was a time when, every bad monsoon would lower our GDP growth significantly. Now, I think 4 to 5% is there for the taking. So we are a very capable people. We will not fall below that threshold, but certainly we are not achieving our potential. And,
I think we need to summarize.
I'll quickly wind up. And Jugaad is, not the way to go forward. You have to go forward through standard, prudent policies. And we talk of the demographic dividend. The demographic dividend is wasted one generation at a time. Right from primary education, we have a huge issue with the quality of education. Primary stage itself, people drop out. People graduating from primary level don't have basic functional skills. So the generation presently entering primary school is already wasted, unless we don't do something about it. And of course, so the key thing is that we missed the manufacturing bus. We have a unfriendly business environment. And at every stage, whether it is pre-investment approvals, setting up your factory, finding the land, finding the infrastructure linkages, finding the utilities, power, water, etc., it's a huge issue. In spite of, we claim we've done 40,000 simplifications in the last 10 years, but in spite of 40,000 simplifications, ask a businessman whether it's easy to set up a business. The answer is clearly no. And there is no way we can afford to miss the manufacturing bus. We have to catch the bus, and the buses are getting more and more difficult to catch. People talk about services. Services, a high value addition job requires post graduate education. You need to be beyond a graduate to have a high value addition job in services. Our teeming masses, unemployed, underemployed masses are fit for essentially workflow jobs, and you need manufacturing for that. Services, they can be, delivery boys and things like that, whom you see on the roads today.
Mr. Wadhwan.
Some of them are IT engineers, by the way. So let me say that we need to get a house in order, and that'll be the next part of my answer. Thank you.
Before I request Mithali to make her points, I just would like to request the panel to essentially focus on the microeconomics of the manufacturing process, because I think we're going a little into more macroeconomic and the impacts of manufacturing, but without quite addressing what we are talking about, what ails manufacturing. If we could focus on the microeconomics of manufacturing, that would kind of help a little. Yeah.
So thank you. First of all, I think I'd like to thank IMI, and I'd like to thank Sir and the entire organizing team for inviting me here to be part of this illustrious panel. And just to give a little bit of introduction of the work that Nikor Associates does, just in one line, especially on manufacturing, we focus a lot on integrating women's labor force participation into the manufacturing, logistics, trade, and supply chains environment. So a lot of the research that I've done in the manufacturing space actually focuses on integrating women into the employment. And the second area we focus on is really, as Charan sir also said, around MSMEs, because at the end of the day, over 90% of our manufacturing employment, not revenue, is actually coming from the MSME manufacturing. And in fact, when we say MSME, we don't just mean medium, but actually small, micro, and in fact even nano self-employment, kind of enterprises, even today, which is a mainstay for the economy. So, it becomes important when we are talking about manufacturing to talk about the marginalized even within manufacturing, because within manufacturing, one of our biggest challenges is that we have a lot of marginalized groups, and the MSMEs and the women are actually part of that. So I'd like to divide my remarks into 2-3 components. The first one is what is happening in the sector today. Like Sir said in his introduction, what's the landscape? So of course that the PLI scheme, the production linked incentive scheme, is one of the biggest innovations we've seen post-COVID in the manufacturing sector. Now, is this innovative enough? At the end of the day, the central government is essentially providing financial incentives for certain chosen subsectors. But my argument is it doesn't need to be that innovative. It is a simple financial incentive mechanism. As long as the private sector investor receives the incentive on time and actually receives the payment on time, it means the scheme is working. And that is the feedback that we've got from a number of subsectors at this point, that whether it's electronics, whether it's auto, whether it's electric vehicles, these are sectors where we've seen that the scheme is starting to show results in terms of the number of companies that have come and set up shop, whether it's Samsung or Apple. And we've heard reports about how Samsung and Apple are both manufacturing a lot of mobile phones, for example, in India, and Apple is actually exporting its mobile phones from India to even the US now, which was something unimaginable maybe 20-25 years ago. So I think we have to take the positive also into account when we are having this discussion. The second thing which, which we are finding in the whole landscape is the urban industry nexus. I've been part of a several number of projects with the ADB and the World Bank in the last 4 to 5 years, where we are seeing state governments come to us and say, we would like to actually invest in building a new city, and that new city should have ready plug and play industrial infrastructure, bring in anchor investors, and then we will set up urban townships and city development around that manufacturing and industrial development. Examples include Sri City in Tamil Nadu and Amravati, which is now being planned in Andhra Pradesh. I recently visited Vijayawada and Amravati, and it's a fantastic concept of having a twin city where you have a Vijayawada already, which has a good population, urban population, and then you bring in a lot of industrial investment into setting up townships in a planned manner in Amravati. Gift City in Gandhinagar also to some extent, though of course it will be focused more on financial services, but at the same time there is a plan to expand the administrative area of Gift City and bring in in institutional investors and manufacturing sector investors as well. So I mean, what this is to say that at the end of the day there are some state governments who are thinking about planned industrial development and urban industry linkages to some extent. And the third positive thing I'd like to point out is around the net zero commitments that India has made. At the end of the day, India has made international commitments to reach net zero by 2070, and there is a movement across different sectors to get especially larger manufacturing players from the large corporates and MNC sectors to commit to these net zero targets. So they have to make changes in their supply chains in the next 20 to 40 years. Having said all this, this is our positive picture, and we should hold on to this because this is important. But having said all this, we must also recognize the challenges, right? So the challenges, I would begin with talking about labor and the issues when it comes to skilled labor. A lot of manufacturers today want to have more digitization and automation on the shop floor, on the factory floor. I've visited factories even across the country, whether it's in the south or in the west, where there's a lot more focus on digitization. But our labor is not getting trained in that because the curriculum in the industrial training institutes, which are the largest sort of areas where you can actually have skill training for being in the manufacturing sector, they still have old, outdated equipment which has no relationship to what is actually being expected at the factories. So that is one of the major areas that our workforce cannot be readied until we look at our skilling facilities. The second area is around infrastructure. Now, as I mentioned, some of the areas this industry urban linkage is coming up, but in most parts of the country we still don't have plug and play industrial parks. See, when a person wants to come in, they will say, आप मुझे बस plot दिखा दो, मुझे यहाँ पे अपना factory लगाना है. I need to have running water, I need to have electricity which is affordable, I need to have certain facilities in this area, infra facilities. That is still missing in most states. There are some states that have done very well in this. Tamil Nadu is an example, Karnataka to some parts of Karnataka, Maharashtra, Gujarat. But after having mentioned few of these states which are really doing well, what is happening in others? Even Rajasthan, by the way, has done very well. I mean, they have set up a South Korean manufacturing cluster where lots of South Korean firms have come and set up automotive facilities. But these are like, examples which are sprouting, but it's not a by and large systematic effort. So that's the second issue. The third issue is with respect to how we are looking at sustainable manufacturing. Abhi kya hota hai? I've been to plants in Mathura, Ghaziabad, etc. for example, from where I'm giving this example. One will go there, pollution aapka badha, like right now what we are experiencing. The Central Pollution Board will come and just shut down the factories. But what is happening throughout the year, they will not look at that. They will not look at the methods of manufacturing. They will not look at the fact that the person who is running that factory, especially in MSMEs, they are just throwing untreated waste into the rivers in that area and just polluting the rivers throughout the year. So at the end of the day, we have to have less compliance driven and more subsidy and incentive driven, compliance when it comes to green manufacturing. My last portion, and then I'll conclude, is around MSME sector. What are the specific issues ailing MSMEs? Today, if you talk to any MSME, whether it's male-led or women-led, because there are different issues for both, the first and most important issue is मुझे हर 3 हफ्ते बाद GST filing करनी पड़ती है. And at the end of the day, if you are an MSME, I'm also an MSME, by the way. I'm registered as an MSME. And this is my biggest problem also, because my client has not paid me, but I have to make my GST filing based on my projected revenue, based on the contract I signed. So at the end of the day, my working capital challenge becomes even more compounded, because I'm just paying taxes without actually getting the receivables from my client. And for manufacturing sector MSMEs, this is primarily large manufacturing companies who are not paying them on time, or government sector manufacturing orders where they are not being paid on time. So both of these issues actually compound on a daily basis. This is like their biggest challenge. The second challenge is with respect to, of course, sir already spoke about access to finance, so I won't repeat. That's the second biggest challenge. The third one is around skilled labor. Now we have an apprenticeship scheme that the government of India has launched, but the apprentices don't want to come and work in MSMEs. They want to work in large companies. So the kind of labor that MSMEs are getting are again very unskilled, and they become almost like training institutes on their own, trying to skill this labor and trying to bring standardization. And the fourth is that if they want to get into exports, they have to meet the quality compliances for exports, which are set by European standards or American standards, which is very hard for them to meet, but they have to do it if they have to become suppliers to large companies. So, putting all of this together, there are certain positive strands I see that are coming up in the manufacturing space, which can be promising. But at the same time, we have to take our marginalized groups and communities of MSMEs and women together for moving forward in the sector. And I'll of course add more as we go to the next round. Thank you.
Good morning. Thanks very much for having me. First, I'd like to add a disclaimer that whatever I say over here is my personal view. It's not the view of the organization that I belong to. Having said that, I would restrict myself to, you've already heard so much about it. I'll try and restrict myself to the question that what my little understanding about why manufacturing has not picked up. Then we can later on discuss about what we need to do and move towards the 7 trillion and all those kind of stuff. The other thing that I'll try to restrict myself, given my limited knowledge about the overarching, I will keep myself to electricity sector also subsequently. If we see the way that the economy has evolved over the period of time, we are a $3.5 trillion economy now, but if you see the breakup, we have probably taken 14 years or even more to reach that $1 trillion. Then maybe 5-6 years to be there in the $2 trillion. And then in a very short period of time, we became $3.5 trillion. To my mind, we have not ever really seen and foreseen what is coming. We've always been very short-sighted as compared to many other countries who have actually grown in leaps and bounds. We kept on talking about our demographic dividend, not realizing that the demographic dividend be a demographic disaster if we really do not plan things in a proper manner. We liberalized, we did a lot of stuff, but if you see the composition of the GDP that it is today, it's about more than 50% is from the services sector. It's about 28-30% is from the industry, and very little from the agriculture about 18% or so. But if you see the employment, the composition of the employment in terms of, I think, if you see that the employment is about 560 million or something like that, a very small actually percentage of the employment is employed in the industry. And also, the bottommost is industry and just manufacturing, not industry, manufacturing. Just above that is construction, which is all of them is an 11 to 13% range, each of these. And then it is the services sector, which is about 20% or so. So if you see the 20%, 28% is basically adding that 53%. What led to this thing is that there was a IT boom that happened globally, and there was a tendency that, okay, the children, they wanted to be educated, families, they wanted to be educated, their children to get into line which is more lucrative in some sense. And that gave the push to a great extent towards the services to a considerable extent. And while we kind of pushed for education, but the focus of the government has always been input-oriented policies. So the focus has always been on, in terms of enrollment, going to school, but learning experiences have not been very good. I'd like to ask many of you this question that were here in the MBA. You may be many of you coming from the engineering background and do not want to be an engineer. You want to be in the sales, in the marketing, in the finance, and many of you. It's lucrative, right? You want to also have your own startups, IT, all this kind of stuff. How many actually want to be nuts and bolts engineers? Because there was no taking for that. So there is a demand that needs to be created for that. That was not foreseen to a great extent. And that is actually one of the biggest problems in terms of infrastructure, industry not taking up. We have also for everything, you will energize the growth is very important. So electricity, energy, all of these things have been extremely important. But there is a politics of electricity has always played a very important role, and subsidies and distribution companies in a very, very poor financial situation, all these things, we know about all these things. But we also have to recognize that if you look at today or in 2022 and take a global thing in terms of purchasing power parity terms, how expensive is electricity in India? And what is the per capita income in terms of purchasing power parity terms? You'll find that if you have USA as one, India is 3 times in terms of the electricity per unit. 3 times of that. And in terms of per capita income, we are 0.12, which is basically 12% of the US. So in terms of per capita income, we are very low. Okay, and in terms of your electricity, so the percentage that if you just do a little bit of calculation, that if everybody in the G20 countries, everybody pays the same amount or consume the same amount of electricity, it will find that the burden on India or any consumer will be 25 times. And if you see that that is the thing, there's a cross subsidy, the industry is actually paying much more than what their cost of supply is. So you are actually not making life very easy for the industry actually in terms of doing that. In manufacturing, the production function will have capital, labor, energy, and materials. What have we done for materials? We have a lot of labor. We have not actually tuned them to the requirements of the industries to a great extent because they have never been interested to do that. We are creating STEM graduates annually, which is about 3.6 million annually. And now we need to create jobs to move to 2030 of 7.85 million annually. How many of them actually want to go towards it? The industry has also not picked up because we have never had a realization, look, the focus has been IT. If we can import a lot of stuff, then why not go about doing it? What do you need to kind of build up your own manufacturing doing that? So people move towards it, the graduates move towards KPOs, BPOs. When you realize that, look, there's a social need to kind of create more jobs, you create jobs through KPOs and BPOs, but it is not, they will have their own social issues. So forget about that. The other thing is that in terms of resources, do we have control over resources? We don't probably, and probably we can discuss that later on. So we never planned for the manufacturing to pick up. Now suddenly we wake up one fine morning and we realize that, look, the whole world is now, we have skipped that whole thing about agriculture to industrialization to services. We skipped that We moved to services. Now we are going back and realizing that we need to build up on services, manufacturing, because we have to engage more people. We have to do all of that. And then other colleagues of mine over here, panelists, fellow panelists, they've already mentioned about other things. They mentioned about interest rates and so many other things, infrastructure to be built up. But the question still remains is that we never planned for manufacturing because we never realized. We wanted to grow very fast, per capita income to go up. So the easy route was basically go for the services sector. And then when money started coming in the hands of people, develop real estate. Okay, and then you suddenly realize that, okay, you need to have more steel, more cement, and then you get into that loop. So I'll leave it at that for the others to pick up, that to my mind, we never planned for manufacturing appropriately. We can be picky about this law or this particular legislation, this particular policy. But the thing is that we never did anything. We wanted private sector to come in, but we never realized that, look, this is what the issues are. And we can go into micro issues, but there can be hundreds of them.
Thanks a lot. So speaking at end, the plus point is that everybody has spoken, so my job is done. But the negative side is I have to bring some value to you guys, otherwise I will not be doing justice. So let me start. You asked for post-industrialization. Let's be honest to India. When Britishers came, that time, our contribution to global economy was around 27 to 30%. Very impressive, right? So we have the capacity. So I'm giving a hope. I'm also giving a hope that when Industrial Revolution happened and Asian countries, and I will say except Europe, everybody lost out massively. The system was put in Europe to drain out the wealth from around the world and make Europe rich. That was an aberration. It was not the rule. If you go 2,000 years back, if you go 1,000 years back, India and China were the dominant force globally. And the good part is, it's coming back. So you are living in Asian century, okay? So I'm giving hope. India and China used to be 55 to 60% of the global economy, okay? I'm giving hope. Now, when India got freedom, it was a startup where no investor wanted to invest. No investor. At that time, the investor was Europe. America was coming up. Soviets were putting house in order. No one. So that was a failed startup without investor. But our freedom fighters navigated it so well. I do not see a replica till now. Okay? Today, as a nation, we have ambition. We achieve things. The whole software revolution, the whole digital revolution, you name it. 5th largest economy, 10th largest, 5th largest, going to be 3rd largest startup ecosystem. So I see clearly that there is a hope and we are on the right path, provided we do not mess around where India, I find now, India has expertise to mess around. Okay, somehow our policymakers have that expertise to mess around. If I make a comparison, so I work for Dell, I look after 36 countries like ASEAN country, China, Taiwan, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Korea, and Indian subcontinent. I don't have China yet. Almost 35%, 37% manufacturing of Dell is in my region. If I make a comparison between Vietnam, for example, and India, Vietnam, India was like this around 2016. Today, Vietnam is almost 5 times. So what they are doing right, we need to understand. And Vietnam is not the only solution country to look at. We need to look at Indonesia, Brazil, Mexico, whole lot. What we have to really do is play on our strength. Our strength was earlier, if anybody know Dhaka silk, Britishers and Europeans were crazy. Only elite could afford it. Britishers ruined it systematically because they wanted to sell Birmingham and other Manchester cotton to us. So they ruined it. Okay, so we have the strength, we have to play on our strength. What is our strength? Our strength is scale and domestic market size. But this is not true for all product because of our poor per capita income. And wherever we have a strength, there is a success. Mobile, if you look at mobile number, there was a scale, and that's why Apple became successful. Apple didn't become successful unless until we have something for them to be successful. They will not create market for us. Wherever we don't have a strength, there is a challenge. Okay? Now you analyze. I'm not going in detail because I have limitation on time. We don't have a lot of ecosystem. So if I'm looking at IT hardware, server, laptop, desktop, and many other products, or mobile, automobile, if you look at the old one, unless until there is ecosystem, Maruti did right by putting ecosystem. Okay? So wherever there is ecosystem, chance of success is high. And I will just stop here by saying, continue to have ambition, and we will go around the next round, and I will bring more thoughts, what I have. Thanks.
This light is on, so I will keep the light on. I think it gets it. Okay. I'm basically light is on.
Oh, sure.
When the light is on, it's. Thank you, panelists, for the first round of comments. Just overstepping my remit as the moderator, one major problem, and then this is something that you guys can think about, I've mentioned it to students in my class. Capital is in the organized sector, which is about 10 to 15% of GDP, okay? And of the manufacturing sector by size, 20, 30% at most. And 70%, which is the unorganized sector, has labor. So there's this complete differential where one sector, which is smaller, has all the capital, and the larger sector has only labor but no capital. If you go to Germany or Taiwan, where the small and medium sector plays a very important role in the economy, you will find that even SMEs are highly, highly capitalized. Okay? They are highly capitalized. They are not, you know, these mom and pop kind of affairs. So that's one definite thing. Talking of Professor Mr. Ahmed's point about India, I mean, he quotes the Cambridge History of India when he says that India and China were 60% of global GDP just before the Industrial Revolution, and he's absolutely right. I mean, to come to the more recent past, in 1947, India contributed 11% to global exports. Today our share is 2%. So that drop between 11% and 2% is probably more important, in my opinion, than what we were in, you know, pre-industrial times. Because, and that's, I think, more kind of, you know, tied into the topic of today. But thank you very much for your insights. One more thing that we discussed, at least in my micro classes, was the marginal product of labor and capital, okay, which speakers have indirectly alluded to. But that, I think, we lack very far behind. And I'm now going to come to the second thing, because Professor Charan Singh has to leave, and so I want to get this, so I'm just going to leapfrog like we did manufacturing, okay? We leapfrogged manufacturing from agriculture to exports. Oh, talking of the leapfrog, the current COVID, demo, GST, in turn, I mean in their own particular way, has actually taken us back from 42% in the labor force to 47%. And that's not a small number for India. That 60 million people for India have gone back into agriculture, okay, over the last 7 years. So that's one thing. So I'm going to leapfrog again and ask a question. Everyone knows there is the NMP, I just briefly alluded to it. Then there is the, what's it called? The Make in India, which I said was largely a rewrite of the NMP, then which includes things like PLI and things like that. But it's not working. I mean, and again, speakers have spoken about it. It's not gone beyond 15%. So starting with Professor Charan Singh, I would like the panelists to reimagine national manufacturing policy in two ways. One, which leverages what we've learned, the positives from our experience over the last 15 years, and what can be done better. Professor Charan Singh.
So I think this is a very good follow-up question actually, and I would go with what Madam Mithali said, that if you look at the grassroots level, what is really happening in the industry. So you have environmental issues always tied up, and getting the licenses and getting approvals is almost an impossibility, and you have to run from pillar to post to just get one license, and you never know with hindsight that what has been granted to you may get cancelled. So these are the type of challenges which are happening. But I also want to bring in the point which was brought in by Mr. Ahmed. Mr. Ahmed, you are so right. The gap between Vietnam and India expanded. You have taken the example of Vietnam and India. If you had taken the example of Bangladesh and India, it was much wider, right? So then the issue is, for last 10 years, we have been saying that we have not been able to make the best of manufacturing because of the legacy, which I also mentioned, and I think it was also mentioned by Mr. Samit Basu, that we could not take advantage of the legacy and why have been falling back. But then if you look at what China did, how did China in 1978 did not have a single foreign company operating there, and in 2019, just before COVID, 960 foreign companies were operating in China. How did that happen? 1978 zero company, and 2018 960,000 odd companies operating in China. How did that happen? So then China did everything that you can imagine to induce, seduce manufacturing into China. Why did all over the world companies just ran into like a magnet in China and started producing? So it's not too much of a trade secret. They gave free land, they gave free power, they gave free building structure, they gave free housing, and when everything that they gave free, and then over and above it, they gave 60% subsidy if you exported it. This is for the manufacturer. And then if you look at the way they manipulated their exchange rate, further cheapened Chinese thing. Now we are in India, a democratic country. Moment you sneeze, there are 10 reporters who will come and say, why did you sneeze? And you have polluted the whole environment. So you will have to be very careful. And fine, we are amongst the respected democratic countries in the world, unlike China, which is not very respected. But despite that, when we knew we have a young demographic India, We knew that we need to generate employment, MSMEs one. Why were we not able to offer the same type of facilities that China was providing? We would not have manipulated our exchange rate because we are ethical, perfect. We probably would not have given a dumping incentive of 60% support to go and export. We would not have done that. We could have given them free land, given housing to the labor, given a manufacturing shed. We could have created more industrial export processing zones and industrial zones. The Northeast is waiting to develop. Totally virgin area that we had. We didn't do it. So whom are we to blame? I think so we are ourselves to look into it. So if I have to conclude, I'll say one positive thing about the country. The policymakers, they came out with a Make in India, Stand Up India, Startup India, and now we are iconic in Startup India, as was mentioned, third largest. Good. But when it comes to brass tack, on the ground, I think we missed the bus. The last point I want to make, and we missed the bus because we could not replicate China. The last point I want to make in this is about MSMEs. Now, when we are talking of MSMEs, remember, people on the dais would know it better, and students, you should actually Google and see for yourself. In 1965-66, we were in a very bad state of affairs. We used to live from ship to mouth. Food grain would come on the port, and then we'll all get food to eat. If Americans decide not to send us the food grain, we'll starve. PL 480 could be a good Google start searching point. So now we did the Green Revolution. And how did we do the Green Revolution? We started with agriculture universities because that time we needed food. Now we have problem with employment. Nearly 1 crore people entering into the workforce. With AI and ML coming in, you're not going to have more people joining the forces. You have the cameras and drones to do the work which army or police used to do all these years. Public sector is going to chase, private sector is going to chase profit. They're going to compete with the best of the best in the world. They're going to ask for 100 crore investment, just 10 jobs, everything will be done AI or computers. So then the point is, what are we doing to now take care of our children's job? If in 60s and 70s we came out with agriculture universities, can't we come out with MSME universities now? Where R&D, finance, training, ethics, environmental concerns, labor laws, GST and taxation role, and human behavior and management skills, everything will be taught to a child in one university and an entrepreneur created and put into the market. Why have we not thought about it? So I think there's lots of things to think, and therefore I think when we say in the manufacturing lost, we are lagging behind because we are still not thinking out of the box. Thank you.
It really tears me up, but if we could keep our points shorter. Yeah. No, I don't mean to be impertinent, but we just want to include the students.
Yeah, so let me be very pointed and specifically answer the question as to why these initiatives which were mentioned have not really had the desired effect. So the first thing is that we are very prescriptive and supply driven in our initiatives to address the issue of a poor investment environment. So as I mentioned, we've done 40,000 simplifications in the last 10 years, but that is a prescriptive understanding of what the demand side wants, what the investor wants. So obviously, at some level, these 40,000 simplifications have not adequately improved our investment environment for industry to flock, investors to flock to India the way they flock to China and the way they are now flocking to Vietnam. So we have to be more, outcomes focused, more focused on what is the investor missing. So investor confidence is a very delicate and ephemeral thing. You do 40,000 simplifications and you do 1 or 2 things to undermine your credibility, it shakes up the entire confidence completely. And we have a propensity to do some of these things. So all these initiatives, let us take PLI. they are not addressing that larger issue of investor confidence. PLI basically, you are giving an incentive, and you know, China, Vietnam, all these countries have given incentives, Thailand also, others, for investors to come in to overcome the cost disadvantage of your environment. So Indian environment offers a huge cost disadvantage. So PLI is a good initiative to get the investor in, but that is only a starting point. You want that investor now, your Apple phones are getting exported, you want all the component manufacturing to shift into India also. And it will not shift unless you solve those other problems which are missing. And so that is where we have to be more investor focused. And you see all the other issues like IT, for instance. It is not that, you know, we had a particular propensity for IT. That was a necessity on the part of the investor, that IT is able to, do without some of the inputs that manufacturing needs. Manufacturing requires a plug-and-play environment of a much higher order. IT requires a plug-and-play environment of a much lower order. So, ironically, it was said at that time that because Indian government didn't have a department of IT even, and all that happened in a sense without the government even being conscious of things happening. But it was basically the fact that our manufacturing environment was so poor that people, ended up investing in IT. And the issue of skilling. Skilling develops endogenously as economies progress. China starting off didn't have a skilled workforce. Vietnam starting off didn't have a skilled workforce compared to what India has. We've had skilling missions, but skilling in a vacuum doesn't work. That you'll sit and get state-of-the-art skills. As long as there are no jobs, that skill gets dissipated and wasted. We have had 2 skill development missions. Each time, we tried to have a state-of-the-art mission, but they failed. Largely because there is the issue of demand for those, services, those skills which is missing. And so the solution, of course, I'll come to later, but SCZs were thought of as a solution. As Mitali mentioned, we need a plug-and-play environment for manufacturing. SCZs were thought of as a plug-and-play solution, but why did they not offer the same kind of plug-and-play solution as China did or Vietnam did? How come SCZs are failing in India and working brilliantly elsewhere? We need to look into those issues. We didn't really create a island of excellence. What you need in an SCZ is an island of excellence where you isolate that zone from the general chaos of your economy, the general chaos of your society, the issue of credibility. The Chinese have succeeded because they created SCZs, they created an environment which was insulated from their general environment. If the Chinese had treated their investors the way they treat their own population, they would not have succeeded. So sometimes we say that Chinese are authoritarian, that's why the investor is, happy there. They're authoritarian with their own people, but they treated the investors with kid gloves. A promise given was a promise kept. You look at the experience of investors. I've been to Shanghai a few times, spoken to the European Association of Investors, the American Association of Investors. They don't have a complaint. They have some complaints at the margin. Some of that authoritarianism sometimes creeps into their dealings with investors, but largely they've succeeded because they insulated their investor from the general chaos and the general deficiencies of the larger economy. So economy-wide reform is not going to work for us also. We need to create this pocket of excellence, decentralized approval mechanisms, where it's complete plug and play. Here's the land, here's the water, here's the power, here's the railhead, here is the roadhead, state-of-the-art logistics. You bring in an investor there blindfolded, open his blindfold, he or she should not be able to tell whether he is in India or China or Vietnam or Europe or America. So you have to create these pockets. That's the only way we'll give a credible promise to the investor and make him come. Otherwise, this economy-wide reform, you're ticking the boxes, one after the other won't work. So enough for the moment.
Yeah, quick comments, Mitali. Sorry.
No problem. So I think a lot of the points have already been covered, so I'll be very fast. I think the first point that we really need to think about is industry and training institute linkages. At the end of the day, there is no point in skilling people in obsolete skills. We need to say, you know what, go to the new industry that is being set up in the cluster close to your home, get the skilling there and get the job there. So that is the first and most important thing. And expanding the apprenticeship programs, that is also very, very critical. The second thing is that we have to really do a mass sort of investment in what we call waste treatment plant and common effluent treatment plants. Because across the country, the one state which has done this brilliantly is Gujarat. You will find a CETP, common effluent treatment plant, which is something which a SME can also plug into for treating their waste, and just by paying a small monthly fee, they can actually treat their waste, and Gujarat has set this up in every district. So this is the way to go forward when we are talking about circular economy and cleaning the waste and moving forward. The other issue which I think Charan sir talked about, MSME universities and a strategic approach, at the end of the day, we should think about how can we, and in fact this was mentioned in the economic survey this year as well, how can we collaborate more with countries like China instead of thinking about competing with countries like China. Because at the end of the day, again, it's not just China, it's also the whole of East Asia, and how East Asian miracle, as we say in economics, has come up because of the manufacturing sector. And a lot of, in fact, manufacturing, Tabrezji also, as we were discussing before, in Vietnam or even in Thailand is coming from Chinese funded enterprises. So, at the end of the day, there is a lot of capital that has been created even in East Asia, and India should look into getting that capital to India as well. It's not only about Western economies, but about, the Dubai-based economies, the Singapore-based economies, the China-based economies to come and manufacture in India, not only the US or UK-based kind of companies. So that's very important. And the second and third issue I would say is, like Sir said, Northeast is still virgin land. Maybe that's a good thing, because from the environmental point of view, that having large scale manufacturing in the Northeast is very complicated because you have hilly terrain. So at the end of the day, I think we need to have a very strategic state by state, district by district approach to manufacturing to identify what is the commodity and what is the scale of manufacturing which is possible. For example, in our plain, northern states, what is possible in the southern states, how can we leverage our ports, and how can we leverage a Kandla port versus a Tuticorin port versus a Kolkata port in order to actually diversify the manufacturing. So we need a very strategic approach to manufacturing.
Thank you.
So I'll just leave a couple of challenges in front of you. First is that while a lot has been spoken, I'll just put things in a little different perspective, is that we are faced with a unique challenge of balancing what we called an energy trilemma. And that's very critical, because electricity is fundamental to everything that we do from here onwards, and so far it was important, but going forward it will be immensely important, because when we talk about decarbonization, when we talk about climate change, we talk about everything, central is electricity. And whether it's manufacturing, services, residential. So electricity demand is going to grow tremendously, driven by, one is that your own manufacturing, you want to build up, urbanization, population, the nature of the demand, all of these things actually is going to. So you have to first ensure that you provide not only access but availability of electricity at a more efficient price. That is the first block. The second block is basically where you're talking about energy security. And energy security does not necessarily mean that security within the country, security from imports, security of ensuring that the supply is happening in a more secured manner, sustainable manner. So all of this is elemental to the security concept. And finally, you have the environmental and the sustainable aspect. So environmental, we have made certain climate commitments, which we as a responsible nation, we have made commitments in terms of 500 gigawatts of renewable, non-fossil capacity to be added. We also said that 50% of our consumption has to be from non-fossil sources. So it's basically a lot of commitments we have made in terms of and several others. So it's basically balancing. The moment you talk about balancing all of these things, it becomes extremely difficult. Because if you see the nature of the economic transition that we're talking about, it's fortified by digital adaptability right now. It's a digital adoption. And digital adoption, and it becomes now very important that every sector, every industry has the digital component, finding the virtual solutions to everything. And the challenge is that the whole about AI and ML is, it sounds not only very romantic and very interesting, but it also is an energy guzzler. So for example, if you do a Google search, and if you do a chat GPT, the chat GPT consumes about 10 times more electricity than a Google search. So if you look at even US and even Europe and various others whose electricity demand was more or less flattened out, they're now going through the roof, and they envisage that going through the roof going forward, because that is going to be an enormous amount of electricity requirement, and they're challenged by it. And if you have look at our own domestic nature of the demand and manufacturing we talk about, that is also in some sense intertwined by so many different kinds of nature of the expansion that is going to come. The policies we talked about PLI, but it has always been removing the, in some sense, the first, before PLI, we introduced domestic content requirement in various other things. So in some sense say that, look, you have to use your own, your kind of own products. But the thing is that it was only to create a market for the manufacturing to step in, but manufacturing did not step in because by that time we lost the race, because some other country has actually done that in terms of something and we imported that. So there was no actually attraction over there. Then we introduced production linked incentives. But when we introduced production linked incentives, which in, for example, the solar and the PV sector, it does not mandate them to sell to the domestic market. They can find something in the America or in the on the Europe as more attractive, so they can actually avail the PLI and go and sell over there. We created SEZs, but SEZs are treated as a foreign country. So the moment a product comes out of the SEZ, they're attracted. If you give a basic custom duty, they're attracting basic custom duty. So they're treated as a foreign country. So anything that you create over there, the policies actually has not been very holistic in that sense. So if you have to balance, and now the thing is that if you have all of this enormous amount of demand growth, and globally, once again, the coal plants are opening up, the nuclear plants are being started, because you're now talking about meeting the energy requirement created by the digital interventions in all of these sectors. And the way that India has to grow and develop now has to be thought in a very different manner. So how do you create these things in a much more holistic manner, and creating policies, ensuring that you continue to balance and maintain the energy trilemma, which is extremely difficult. So while we talk about manufacturing, we talk about achieving the $7 trillion economy, it's a huge challenge in front of us in terms of meeting that and energizing that in a much more holistic manner.
So again, I was just thinking what to say, because most of the things are said. If we look at how we can go about it, let's look at our strength. I have some experience when I was in Microsoft, and that time it was 2005. Manmohan Singh announced National Manufacturing Competitive Council, and Microsoft gave $25 million to Government of India to work on creating synergy with software, helping manufacturing unit to bring competitiveness. It's simple process to explain to you. If software comes, the garment manufacturing company waste will go down through simulation and through accuracy, which will be brought by software. Productivity will go up. They will have backward integration with their supplier and forward integration to their buyer. That way they will become competitive. So work on synergy. Coming forward, all those manufacturing can happen if we look at design link manufacturing, for example. Okay? India has our software companies are helping manufacturing companies globally by providing a lot of design related, lot of embedded software related support. Can we do it for Indian companies here? Can we create that linkages? If we do that, we will be not going through low-end value add manufacturing, what China has done, what South Korea has done. Today, what competition will be from Bangladesh and low-end Thailand or Vietnam. Okay, we will be starting somewhere above. We need to look at, so let me first give you the background and then I will make my point. China, for 30 years, the whole world is investing and making manufacturing stories successful in China. What's their value add percentage? 35 to 40%. Now come to Indian policy. The localization, the value add, Government of India say, if you are 20%, then you can bid, but you are class 2. If you are 50% and above, value add, then you are class 1 and you will win. Achieving 50% value add when China could achieve only 35 to 40%, how difficult it is. So there will be massive frustration and compliance issue because nobody will be able to do it. So learn from what is possible, what is not possible. Look at creating synergy. I was in eBay, and eBay in China used to, so Chinese government said you cannot sell internally, send the packet. Alibaba and those software e-commerce company will do it. You just connect manufacturer of Chinese to the buyer outside. And a small company like eBay used to do $8 billion worth of turnover there. What they did is they had put the policy maker and the government regulatory staff at the front. Next, there was a logistic company. Next, there was how it was the shipping thing. So they have organized it in a way and forced multinational companies like eBay and others to link manufacturer, Chinese manufacturer to the buyer. Okay? Beautiful synergy. Can we do it here? And look at this is my last portion. Look at the opportunity. So everybody is talking about Trump came. Okay? And everybody is worried. India should also be worried because Trump called India charger. Just Google if you have not done. So I know you guys are more real generation than a hardcore research generation. I will suggest you to do research. So Trump administration will come after, and if Lighthizer becomes the USTR, all the more problem. Come after everybody who has surplus, trade surplus, which means Vietnam, Mexico, Japan, Korea, India, everyone. If that happens, then we need to quickly work with the administration to provide a value proposition, and that value proposition is, because Trump will also go after delinking from China more, and delinking, what's coming now is, say for example in Mexico, if you look at the whole component ecosystem or the ecosystem players are Chinese. If you go to Vietnam and look at Hanoi, 100 kilometers of Hanoi, it's all Chinese player, Chinese ecosystem. So Trump will go after them, and India has already sanitized Chinese a lot through our 300 app bans and things like that. There's an opportunity. So value proposition from Indian government to US government should be that, look, I will be a safe supplier. India has done a lot of other initiative. I don't want to go into, just Google trusted telecom, and then look at what under Quad, what we are doing in telecom procurement and things like that. That's the opportunity. India and US has tremendous strategic relationship, but that strategic relationship doesn't translate well in business. So work with USG, new administration, US government, and say that India should have Trade Agreement Act, which means both of us will work on certain issues and then Indian manufacturer can export to US government directly. Indian exporter getting into US government procurement, which is huge, huge. That's the opportunity. I joined Microsoft in US in 2011, and that time Kamala Harris was Attorney General. And she brought a law called Unfair Competition Act. What was that law? That law says if you are IP compliant manufacturer, you can export to US. Okay? So all growth is always through compliance. Japan is high compliance country, and that's why growth is more. Okay? So work on the compliance part. Anybody who has gone to developed economy, one thing becomes very clear. If you are not a rule breaker, you will grow. India needs to put house in order to have high compliance. If our manufacturers are high on compliance, we can have the door open of Western economy. So these are the opportunity. Let me stop here, sir. I don't want to take more time. Thanks.
Just one small announcement. Just one small announcement. I think we're going to have to dispense with the questions because the Econ committee came and told me that the next panel is waiting for its turn here. So I'm sorry, but we just have to dispense with questions.
We can be available outside.
Yeah, that's a
Anybody
possibility.
has a
Yes.
It's
That's a
unfair
possibility.
to students
Absolutely.
not to give them opportunity.
Absolutely, I agree.
On behalf of everyone present here, I express my sincere gratitude to the guest speakers for taking time out from their busy schedules and sharing their thought-provoking insights with all of us. Post this session, we feel relatively more aware and equipped to understand the innovative practices in today's business environment. I would like to take this opportunity to once again thank our moderator, Professor Rajiv Anantaram, for consenting to be the moderator for the session and for making the session highly interactive. I request Rajiv sir to kindly felicitate our esteemed guests. Dr. Charan Singh. Mr. Anup Vadhwan. Miss Mitali Nikor. Dr. Sambit Basu. Mr. Tabrez Ahmed. Now I invite the Secretary of the Economics Club, Mr. Ayush Singh, to felicitate our moderator, Dr. Professor Rajiv Anantaram.
Ladies and gentlemen, with this we conclude the Economic Summit 2024. We are certain that the session has been very enlightening for each of us present here. I would like to take this opportunity to commend all the guests, participants, speakers, professors, students and the staff of IMI New Delhi for making the session an unparalleled success. We would like to thank our title sponsor, NHPC. Let us take a glimpse of their 50-year-old legacy. We would like to thank our investor education partner, UTI Mutual Fund, entertainment partner, White Heaven Entertainments, sports shoes partner, Abros, valued sponsor, Phoenix Global, co-sponsor, RP Sanjeev Goenka Group, event partner, AdSat, value partner, Havish M Consulting, athleisure partner, Decathlon, bath and kitchen partner, Radon, radio partner, Radio FM 93.5, value sponsor, Key Properties, sustainable hydration partner, Piau, animal welfare partner, PETA India, and print media partner, Business Standard. As we wrap up this session, it is my honor to invite our esteemed guest to the stage for a group photograph. We also invite all the members of the Economics Club for the same. Thank you all. We request our guests to proceed to the lobby area for tea and refreshments. Students are requested to stay back.